Germ theory is one of the most important critical discoveries of modern science, and evangelical Christian talk show host and apologist Bob Dutko believes the Bible actually presented the topic centuries earlier in an example of the truth of the Bible.
Disease and germs, we know now, of course, they need to be cleansed by running water, not by stagnant, still water. And you read in Leviticus 15:13, in hygiene issues, it says a man, quote, must wash his clothes and himself with fresh water, and he will be clean. The Hebrew word used there for fresh water is water that's flowing or running. There was no knowledge of germs or disease or knowledge of any kind of health benefits to cleaning flesh in running water as opposed to still water.
Washing may be nothing more than a natural behavior, as it is with the raccoon. The ancient Egyptians were fastidiously clean people, inventors of soap and perfume. The Chinese used brushes and powder to clean their teeth. Bathing and personal hygiene were a regular part of ancient Greek and Roman life as well. The earliest written account concerning codes of hygiene can be found in several Hindu texts, with bathing listed as one of the 5 nitya karmas, or daily duties, in Hinduism. How the concept of personal cleanliness found its way into so many diverse ancient cultures probably didn't come through secretive divine revelation, but through simple observation. Over time, it likely became clear to certain ancient people that touching a diseased person or eating from dirty utensils caused sickness. One needn't require a divinity to uncover such knowledge, just human curiosity and intelligence. Traits apologists like Dutko apparently think ancient people sorely lacked. Besides these facts, Dutko is making a claim here that simply isn't supported by the text, which isn't at all surprising given his track record of misunderstanding the Bible he claims to know so well. Paying careful attention to what Bob is saying, he is claiming that the Bible was instructing people to practice proper hygiene by washing themselves and their clothes, not just in fresh water, but in running fresh water. But is that really what Leviticus 15 is addressing? How to be clean in a hygienic sense? The first problem Dutko runs into is by defining the Hebrew word of the verse as fresh running water. The word in Hebrew is chai, and per Strong's does mean fresh and can include the sense of running water. However, the translation obviously has to come from context, as the word has a great diversity of meaning. When applied to animals, for example, it is usually translated living, as in Genesis 1:21a.
And God created great whales, and every living creature that moveth, which the waters brought forth abundantly.
When chai is used in relation to water, it can mean running or flowing, or merely fresh, without any connotation about the movement of the water. Again, the meaning can mostly be determined from context. Leviticus 14:5-6 is an example where this same Hebrew word is used, and in the King James Version is translated as running. However, when read, makes little sense using that translation.
And the priest shall command that one of the birds be killed in an earthen vessel over running water. As for the living bird, he shall take it, and the cedar wood, and the scarlet, and the hyssop, and shall dip them, and the living bird, in the blood of the bird that was killed over the running water.
How is it possible to use the blood of the first bird if it was killed over running water? Wouldn't the blood have been carried off? Obviously, the better translation for chai here is fresh, as it is found in other English translations of the text. For example, in the NIV.
Then the priest shall order that one of the birds be killed over fresh water in a clay pot. He is then to take the live bird and dip it, together with the cedar wood, the scarlet yarn and the hyssop, in the blood of the bird that was killed over the fresh water.
The verse from Leviticus 15, which Bob says means to cleanse with running water, can also be translated as simply to cleanse in fresh water, again, as in the translation from the NIV.
When a man is cleansed from his discharge, he is to count off 7 days for his ceremonial cleansing. He must wash his clothes and bathe himself with fresh water, and he will be clean.
But more importantly, if we are going to take Dutko's claim seriously that this verse in Leviticus actually was a scientific reference to the importance of cleansing of disease and germs, concepts the ancients at the time of Leviticus's writing clearly couldn't have known, by using running water, why isn't this same running water referenced as required for cleaning anything the diseased man of the verses touched? The entire chapter of Leviticus 15 is about how to deal with men who have an unusual bodily discharge. The chapter states,
Any bed the man with a discharge lies in will be unclean, and anything he sits on will be unclean. Anyone who touches his bed must wash their clothes and bathe with water, and they will be unclean till evening. Whoever sits on anything the man with a discharge sat on must wash their clothes and bathe with water, and they will be unclean till evening. Whoever touches the man who has a discharge must wash their clothes and bathe with water, and they will be unclean until evening. Everything the man sits on while riding will be unclean, and whoever touches any of the things that were under him will be unclean till evening. Whoever picks up those things must wash their clothes and bathe with water, and they will be unclean until evening. Any one the man with the discharge touches, without rinsing his hands with water, must wash their clothes and bathe with water, and they will be unclean till evening. A clay pot that the man touches must be broken, and any wood article is to be rinsed with water.
None of the water mentioned in these verses is water which is qualified by the Hebrew chai. If the true intention of the chapter was to reveal a scientific truth regarding hygiene practices and how people could cleanse themselves of disease and germs, then everything should be washed in running water, not just the person who is having the discharge. Note that any bed or chair that the unclean man lays on or sits upon is not cleansed, only the person touching these items. But if it really were disease and germs that were being eliminated, as Dutko suggests, then these items too should have been cleansed. And not only that, but if disease and germs were the true intention of the verses, why are the people being cleansed not immediately clean, but all must wait until evening? It is because, like a magician, the professional Christian apologist must ignore portions of the text and use misdirection with their audience, getting them to focus in one direction, verse 13 of Leviticus 15 in this case, in order to distract their attention away from another, the remaining verses of Leviticus 15. But this verse in this chapter has nothing whatsoever to do with hygiene. Leviticus 15 is not a scientific insight into the treatment of disease and germs, but is instead religious instruction on how to restore ritual cleanliness. Read the verse again.
When a man is cleansed from his discharge, he is to count off 7 days for his ceremonial cleansing. He must wash his clothes and bathe himself with fresh water, and he will be clean.
The clean here is not in reference to being clean of disease and germs, but ritually clean, which is why running the bed and the chair of the unclean man under any water is not mentioned, and the state of uncleanliness remains until evening, the beginning of the next day, according to Jewish reckoning of time, even after the person has cleansed themselves with water. Notice only the human is unclean, not the objects he uses. And this is made even clearer when we consider how the New Testament Jesus treated these ancient Hebrew customs of cleansing. In Mark 7, there is a story of Jesus being questioned by Pharisees and scribes why his disciples do not wash their hands before eating. The story begins,
Now, when the Pharisees and some of the scribes who had come from Jerusalem gathered around him, they noticed that some of the disciples were eating with defiled hands, that is, without washing them. For the Pharisees and all the Jews do not eat unless they thoroughly wash their hands, thus observing the tradition of the elders. And they do not eat anything from the market unless they wash it, and there are also many traditions they observe, the washing of cups, pots, and bronze kettles. So the Pharisees and scribes asked him, Why do your disciples not live in the tradition of the elders, but eat with defiled hands?
After going into a tirade about how the Pharisees and scribes are hypocrites for following tradition but actually breaking the commandments of God, Jesus finally says in verse 15,
There is nothing outside a person that by going in can defile, but the things that come out are what defile.
Instead of supporting the idea of washing hands in foods, cups, and pots to avoid contact with disease and germs, Jesus points out in verses 18 and 19,
Whatever goes into a person from the outside cannot defile, since it enters not the heart but the stomach, and goes out into the sewer.
The point of the story was obviously to highlight Jesus' argument that one could follow all the rules and rituals of a traditional religion, but still be a person who falls short of God's expectations. He was not giving a lesson on hygiene. If he were, why didn't he take the opportunity here to emphasize the importance of cleanliness in order to combat the invisible agents of Satan? It's because, like the context of Leviticus 15, the washing in Mark 7 is for ritual cleanliness. There's not a hint that dirty hands or utensils carried invisible microbes. However, what's important to note in this little tale for purposes of exposing Dutko's lack of understanding the Bible properly is that the Pharisees and scribes were following the ritual of washing hands before meals not because it cleansed them of unseen disease and germs, but because it simply was a time-honored ritual. And Jesus specifically criticizes that ritual and categorically states that nothing from outside the body can harm it, that ritual cleansing will take away. Jesus is specifically stating that whatever goes in the body just comes out in the toilet. He clearly has no idea about microscopic germs or viruses. But what are the odds that some apologist somewhere will claim that Jesus' lack of support for washing one's hands before eating was actually a scientific insight into naturally strengthening the human immune system? But again, what we find here is Dutko misunderstanding the Bible in its proper contexts and stretching too far for the verse from Leviticus to strain some sort of scientific insight out of the Bible in his quest to prove it true. Funding for this program was provided in part by the generous contributions of viewers like you via Patreon. Consider joining them at www.patreon.com/Bible Skeptic. Thank you.